Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wanted to make big changes in your life, then do we have the Liminal Thinking show for you. Today I'll be talking with Dave Gray, founder of Xplane, and the author of 2 previous books on design, change, and innovation, Gamestorming, and The Connected Company, and his latest, Liminal Thinking. And that's just what I want to talk with him about today, about creating the change you want by changing the way you think. That plus we'll talk about lemonade and Somalia, what in the world's falsifiability, the power of baking cookies, late night video games and routers, the power of a cup of tea, why you might want to put crackers in a bed, and why in the world Spitfire wasn't really doomed. So, gotcha. Welcome to the show, Dave. Are you ready to shine?
I am. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much for being on the show. Before we dive right into things, have you always been an out-of-the-box thinker?
Oh, well, I guess that if I hadn't always been an out-of-the-box thinker, how would I know?
Very well put. I used to say I'm so far out of the box I can't find the box. So that sounds like what you're talking about.
I think I think most people that I would know would probably say yes to that question about me.
How did you get into visual problem solving?
Oh, I was always ever since I was tiny. I was scribbling and finger painting and drawing. I think like all kids. I just think unlike most kids, I never stopped drawing. I mean, I've never met a kid who didn't happily spend hours drawing.
My senior year teacher in high school, I doodled to actually pay attention. And I made these kind of Escher-esque drawings that would double back on themselves and geometric. And he required at the end of the year me to turn in my pictures forever if I wanted to pass his class.
Oh, wow.
Never got him back. So, okay. I may have butchered your name at the name of the company at the beginning, so I've got to ask, what is either Xplane or Xplane?
It's Xplane, and the company is called Xplane because it is really built around my passion for visual explanation, for making things visual, making things clear, and I think it goes back to what I was saying. I was always drawing as a child, but drawing for me was not only a solitary activity. It was something that I used to learn about the world, and often a drawing was my first stab at understanding that it was the beginning of a dialogue with a parent or a teacher to say, did I get this right? Did I understand this right? And so after many twists and turns, I finally decided I'm just going to start a company, and this is what I'll just keep doing what I've always been doing, but I'm going to make a business out of it.
Well, the drawings are certainly powerful. They're throughout your book, and I imagine they're throughout your other books as well. Since this is about liminal thinking, and this is such an important topic today, I know we're going to go there shortly, but what does the word liminal mean?
Liminal is simply a word that means boundary or threshold. It comes from anthropology primarily. It's primarily used there. And we have liminal, both liminal space in terms of physical spaces and liminal periods of time that we have in our lives. An example of a liminal time period might be you're moving out of your parents' house. You're going out, you're going to start your new life. So you're no longer in the old world that you were in, living at home with your family, but you have not yet established your routines and your life that you're going to have yet. That period of time is a liminal time. And we also have liminal spaces that are really border or boundary spaces, threshold spaces that are between one place and another. For example, a train station is a liminal space because you've sort of left where you were. Like you go to New York City's Penn Station, you're sort of not really in New York anymore. You're on your way somewhere, but you haven't got there yet. And that whole time period and the whole spatial activity between, let's say when I fly from St. Louis to San Francisco, all those spaces, I mean, like going through security, getting on the airplane, sitting on the airplane, I'm not really in one place or another. I'm in an in-between place. And liminality refers to those times and spaces where we have that feeling of in between, where we're in transition from one place to another, or from one way of being to another, or from a current state into a future.
It makes me think that while it can be incredibly uncomfortable, similar to liminal, I'm thinking of the word limbo, but with that said, in this liminal place, sort of if we take the people moving out of their parents' home, it's a time of lightness, of being able to pivot and reinvent oneself, because you're not hooked so firmly into one paradigm or another.
That's exactly right. And when you move, and marketers know this, right? Because when you move to a new home in a new city, you get all the junk mail, right? All the things that they know you have to figure out who's your doctor going to be, who are you going to get your car insurance from, where are you going to do your grocery shopping? All these things you have to figure out when you move to a new place, and that's part of that lightness. That's also part of that discomfort. You don't have your old routines. You haven't established your new routines yet. And the idea behind liminal thinking, this book, is that you don't have to wait until you're in a state of transition because of the tides and ebbs and flows of life. You can actually create liminal time and space for yourself. If you're feeling stuck, or if you want to actually shift your life, you can, in a very intentional way, you can create liminal time and space around yourself.
Very cool. And I want to talk in a few minutes how we do that. Before we do that, who is Curt Hanks, and what can you tell us about him?
Curt Hanks is a guy who has written, I think, 30 or 40 books. Very visual books, though. And I remember one of his books was called Rapid Viz. I mentioned this in the beginning of Liminal Thinking. And it was a book that was about drawing, but it was really about more than drawing. It was about drawing as thinking and how to visualize concepts and ideas. And he's also become a friend. I started out as a fan reading his books, and one day I thought, I'll just go see if this guy's on the internet anywhere. Because, when I started reading his books, it was before the internet, before I was ever on the internet, before you could do that. And I found him, and he had a contact form on his website, which is still there if anyone wants to contact him. He's around. He replied, and he replied in such a way that I could tell that he had seen my work. That he was aware of Xplane. He did it in a kind of a coy way. It was like a multiple choice answer. Are you this Dave Gray, or this Dave Gray? But it was clear that he knew which one I was, and that began a conversation, which became a friendship, which became a real deep and lasting relationship, which in a very large way contributed to this stuff in this book, Liminal Thinking. He's definitely someone who has spent a lot of his time in those liminal spaces.
So let's talk more about the liminal spaces then. And what do you mean are beliefs or constructions?
Well, we tend to think of beliefs as just the way it is, right? And if you think about
that's dangerous. I raise a red flag when you say a belief is just the way it is.
Yeah, right. I think it's a tendency that we have. It's a red flag for you, but do you think it's a red flag for a lot of people? Or
that's a good point.
I don't know. I'm not sure if it is or not. What we don't realize is that a belief is something that we have created, that we are active in the creation of. And it's interesting that you asked this question right after asking about Curt Hanks, because one of the very seminal conversations I had with him while I was working on this book was trying to find a way to visualize how beliefs come into being. And I had a conversation with him, and I had drawn a picture of a tree or a garden, and I said, this is maybe my thought about how beliefs come into being. They kind of grow. And he said, it can't be a garden, Dave, because beliefs are constructed. We create them. And the fact is that we have the beliefs that we hold because we have had certain experiences. We've heard stories. We've seen things. We've had experiences. We've had perhaps sometimes very emotionally charged experiences. And our beliefs come about because of those experiences, and we create them. So the idea that belief is something that is now our beliefs may be more or less synchronous with the reality around us, but the fact is that we often don't really test our beliefs in a way that's truly fair. And so we test our beliefs, of course, all the time, but we test them in ways that are, sort of, it's like we got our thumb on the scale a little bit when we do those tests. And so we're often testing our beliefs in ways that we know are going to, in advance, are going to validate our beliefs.
Sort of like if you want to find X, Y, or Z on the web, you go to Google and you're guaranteed to find X, Y, or Z, whatever the opinion or the belief is, to back up your opinion or belief.
Right. You're going to search for X is false.
You're going to find
you'll find plenty of facts. The internet and Google is a great doorway into this. The internet is a supermarket for facts. Any fact you want, you can find it. In fact, you can find a fact to support any belief that you want on the internet.
So from there, perfect. Let's go to what do you mean? The obvious is not obvious.
Yeah. Well, this is a great question. You think about things being obvious. My favorite example of this is if you think about Facebook. Many people are on Facebook nowadays. Not everyone. I'm on Facebook, and often on Facebook you'll find these arguments erupt. Often political. They may have to do with racism. Flashpoints, issues that are relatively volatile in the society. And what's interesting is that these arguments are not often sparked by some opinion piece. They're sparked by a news article. And the argument is not about the news article itself often. It's about what it means. And so you'll find people, and this is a feeling that probably all of us can identify with, is what is wrong with this person? How can they not see this? It is so obvious. And the other person is feeling similarly. This is so obvious. How can you be missing this? How can you be missing this? And I think it's very easy for people to have these arguments to tip over into, well, it's so obvious this person doesn't get it. They must be crazy or stupid. There's only two reasons that you would be denying something that is so obvious, and that is either you're crazy or you are stupid. And this is I call it the battle for the obvious, or the battle of the obvious, because these battles unfold daily. More than daily, multiple times a day. I'm seeing that here, there, everywhere, and I think it's sort of a kind of intellectual laziness to say, well, someone doesn't share my obvious, therefore they are crazy or stupid. I think it's the fact is that people's beliefs make sense to them, and we have 8 billion or so people on the planet, which means we have about 8 billion different sets of experiences that those people have had in their lives that have led them to create the beliefs that they hold. So whether the beliefs are valid or not, or more or less valid, does not invalidate those experiences that they've had, and it doesn't invalidate the reasons that they hold the beliefs that they hold, even if the beliefs themselves may be invalid.
I guess one of the challenges is we need to be able to, as the story goes, and I think you have it in your book as well, we need to be able to empty out the cup to be able to make room for new beliefs to fit in there.
Yeah. We all sort of, we all sit at the center of our universe, right? You're at the center of your universe. I'm at the center of mine. We occupy this point, and it's very hard to have a true dialogue with another person when you're only occupying the point inside of yourself. The trick is to find a way to occupy a point that is somewhere in between you and that other person, or to find a point and occupy a point even that is distant from both of you. And that's actually quite difficult because it requires a level of self-awareness that most people, honestly, are very uncomfortable with.
There's a term you talk about later in the book that may apply here when I think of multiple multiple places to occupy, to triangulate, to be outside of oneself.
Yeah, well, triangulation is this idea that, when you look at anything from multiple perspectives, you gain a better idea of what it is. It could be anything. I mean, a mountain, a house, a car, a person. And we often don't triangulate. When we occupy a position that is at the center of our world, and beliefs are often very closely tied to our sense of self and our identity and our relationships and our family and our friends and our church and in our work, our colleagues, all those things, are things that mean a lot to people. People are reluctant to abandon those things, and in order to triangulate, sometimes you have to step outside and away from those things. I remember when I discovered, I live in the West, I live in the United States. When I discovered Al Jazeera, it was a wonderful thing for me because it was one of the first major news organizations that allowed me to step out and triangulate from the point of view that I was getting. And it's funny, you don't even realize the degree to which you need to triangulate unless you do. You start doing that. I lived in Spain for about a year, and that was incredibly useful, not just in how it helped me learn about Spanish culture in Spain and European culture, but also in how it helped me learn about my own culture and helped me see those things that I was unable to see from within it. And of course, we can't physically, at least maybe some people believe that you can, but I'm not sure that you can physically get out of your body, that you can occupy another space and look down. But I think the more that you can try to create that opportunities for yourself to, at least in your imagination, to try and do that, the better a sense of what's truly real you're going to be able to achieve.
I like that so much. And Al Jazeera, I was first exposed to it just after 9/11 when I was trying to get out of the box and understand what is really going on in a global sense. And I had lived a few years in Europe when I was racing bicycles, and I forgot just how much that influence, that getting out of the boxedness influenced me. And I think that's something that if we have the opportunity to take ourselves out of our comfort zone and go someplace far, far away to be able to experience it, and if not, then with the web and with books, how beneficial that can be.
Yeah, and I do think, it does take courage, and there is a lot of fear in the world, and a lot of fear that's justified in the world. There are things to be afraid of in the world, and things that are legitimately fearsome. But I do think that to the degree that your fear is keeping you from triangulating, it's also keeping you from understanding reality. And go ahead.
Oh, I was going to ask then, what do we, I'm going to put reality in kind of air quotes. You have something in an early chapter, you talk about the danger of confusing beliefs with reality. How in the world do we figure out what really is real?
Yeah, it's a great question. Reality in the completeness of reality. There is the fact that even there is a reality is a belief in itself. So I'm going to step out there and say, I believe there is a real universe, that there is a sun and a moon. But the fact is that the totality of reality is completely unknowable by any one human being. We don't have the mental capacity. We don't have the brain power none of us, to understand everything about everything. So we have to start from that assumption that, at least I believe we have to start from the assumption that, yes, there is a reality. And secondly, that we cannot know everything about it, that the ultimate nature of everything in reality is unknowable by any one of us. There are things that we can know, and there are things that we can know more or less. Most things are in the category of we can kind of know something about it. And when you have, again, 8 billion people all having 8 billion different experiences of reality, for example, I cannot speak with any authority on what it is like to be black in the United States of America, what it is like to be a black person, grow up a person of color in this country. I can only ever be outside of that. There are things that I can do to try and triangulate and understand that experience better. There are things that I could do. But I do think that we have to recognize that when people speak from their experience, that their experience has authority, and that authority should be recognized. And it doesn't mean that you have to agree with everything that people say, but it means that we have to acknowledge, all of us, that we're coming from inside of a box, to use your word, of experiences, a bundle, a package of experiences that we don't know how they might have been different if we had been different, or if we had been operating differently. We only know the very thin linear path that we actually take based on the choices that we take. And we don't know that those choices and those paths are repeatable by anyone else or not. So there's so much that we can't know. There's so little that we can truly know, that I think we have to be looking at the world as a place where we are able to cultivate curiosity and able to get in touch with our own ignorance. And I think until you can get in touch with your ignorance, it's going to be hard to know anything.
Let's go from there. And a few minutes ago, you had used the term abandon. And so it seems like an appropriate time to talk about who in the world is Spitfire, what happened with him, and what is a doom loop.
Spitfire is a rescue dog that my wife and I adopted about 3 years ago or so. Yeah. And so I got to know Spitfire as a rescue. Rescue dog is not like a puppy. A puppy's almost brand new. Puppy's starting almost from zero. A rescue dog has a history, has a past, and Spitfire had beliefs of his own about the world, and he came to us with pre-existing knowledge and beliefs about people, about human beings. And when I first encountered him, we adopted him. We thought he was a great dog, but there was a moment where we gave him, my wife on Thanksgiving Day, gave him a bone, thinking, okay, he's going to love this. We're all having a nice meal. Let's give him something nice to chew on, big, meaty, nice dog bone. And he turned into a really almost like a wild animal, and protecting that bone, and his family around was very awkward. I mean, I was afraid he was going to bite somebody. He didn't, but he did have other episodes similarly where he bit my son. And I think, so a doom loop would be, and I contemplated this, saying, you know what, this is a problem dog. This dog needs to go back to the pound. This dog is a rescue dog. I tried rescuing this dog. I'm not going to continue to rescue this dog if this dog's going to be this way. Mm-hmm. So a doom loop would be, that where I would have taken the dog back to the pound, or continued to treat him in a way that punish him, take the bone away, reinforce his belief, which was something along the lines of, if you get something good, you better fight to protect it, or it's going to probably be taken away. And that would be how I'd probably characterize the dog's belief. And instead of that, we had this guy come over. He was called locally the dog whisperer. He was a dog guy, came and he said, just this dog needs quality time. Spend some time with this dog, and you will find that you'll never regret it. That's be some of the best times you'll ever invest in. You'll have a great time. So I did. We both did. We started investing time in him and energy in him, and instead of punishing him and treating him like a bad dog all the time, my wife would train him. She would put food down in front of him and say no, and if he could wait, she would reward him. And when we would take the dog for a walk, he also had the same reaction to other dogs. Any other dog was an enemy. So when we would take him for a walk, I would bring treats with me, and I would make sure whenever we saw another dog, I would try and make space with the owner to say, hey, can I give your dog a treat? And I would give them both a treat. So awesome. Spitfire, he went from thinking of every dog out there as a threat to literally, probably within less than a year, every dog out there is a friend that I have, a new friend, potential new friend. And he has, I guess the point of the story is that you bring expectations to every relationship that you have, and those expectations can become self-fulfilling prophecy. If my expectation was that this dog could never change, I would have probably created a situation where the dog would not have changed. If I had approached that dog, what I did do is approach that dog with the idea, helped along by the dog whisperer. I wish I could remember his name. I only met him for an hour. The idea that this dog is a good dog, that he just needs to learn some new habits. And that dog is our best friend. I mean, he's a wonderful guy, and we've now spent time with him, a lot of time with him. And I do think that your expectations, you don't tend to think about your expectations creating reality. But they do. They have a tremendous power to do that.
And that can be quite positive, or as you're saying, with a doom loop, quite dangerous as well.
Yes, and that's the doom loop is a self-reinforcing cycle where your expectations, inform a situation and make the kind of behavior that you're expecting or afraid of more likely to happen, as opposed to less likely to happen. And that can just kind of self-reinforcing and get worse and worse. Sometimes called a vicious cycle.
So let's go from vicious cycles and not so vicious dogs. You go, Spitfire. And let's talk about you becoming a university professor in the early 90s and how beliefs create blind spots.
Okay, I was in the newspaper business. I was doing my visual explanation thing. I was really enjoying that work. And one day I looked up and I was kind of aware, even in the early 90s, it was pretty clear that newspapers was not a growing industry. Newspapers were getting shut down all over the place, and seemed like every 6 months there was another newspaper shutting down, and all my friends getting laid off. And I realized I wasn't going to have a future in this business. I needed to find a future somewhere else, so I thought I'd maybe find a teaching job. I thought maybe I could teach people how to do this, or computer art and that kind of thing. And I went to some of my friends who were in that academic world, and they were not very encouraging at all. I mean, pretty much everyone I talked to said, "Oh, you can't get a teaching job at a university without a master's degree." And I went to one guy at the University of Washington, I believe it was. He was very condescending, in my opinion, and he pointed at this stack and said, for our last position, we had 600 applicants. So, I mean, don't waste your time, basically. And so I thought, this maybe is out of the box, could qualify as out of the box thinking. I thought, okay, well, I want to do this. So there are two things I can do. One is I can go and get a master's degree. That's going to be a couple of years, probably $100,000 or more. Or I could just poke this theory a little bit and test it. I can just apply for a job, and if I don't get a job, then I can still go get a master's degree.
Yep.
So I thought, okay, I'll just give it a try. There happened to be a art educator symposium that was happening in Seattle, where I lived at the time, and I thought, okay, I'll just apply and see what happens. And turned out I accidentally applied to Washington University School of Art, which I thought was in Seattle, but it was actually in St. Louis. I ended up getting a job, which is why I now live in St. Louis. So there's some serendipity for you. But I did discover that, well, in fact, it is possible to get a job in teaching without a master's degree. And so I saved myself 2 years and $100,000. So it was actually pretty. But I think, a lot of times those things, people use those things as you don't test those things because it's actually in some ways easier mentally to do it the way that everyone says you should do it, as opposed to challenging that and questioning that. And I suppose testing a hypothesis is another way of triangulating. It's another way of triangulating and saying, well, okay, that is a theory. That's one way of thinking about it. What's another way of thinking about it? Could I test that? And I think that you asked about a limiting belief, or you asked me to describe what a limiting belief is. A limiting belief is something that limits your scope of thought. So sometimes, my friends were very well-meaning, and they were giving me what to them was good advice when they said you need to get a master's degree before you apply for this. Who knows if those beliefs had limited them? There's this pretty famous experiment that I could not point you to, but I read of with monkeys where they had punished them somehow for going outside of their cages. And then the new monkeys came in and they didn't punish the new monkeys, but they realized that they were watching the old monkeys and the old monkeys weren't leaving the cages. And then they took the monkeys that had been punished out of this ecosystem entirely, and they put new monkeys in, and all these monkeys had learned a behavior, but none of them had ever been punished in any way for stepping out of the cages. And so these limiting beliefs can be propagated with people, with monkeys. I mean, the fact is that until somebody steps out and tests a limiting belief and challenges it, it can actually limit people in a very real way.
How do we know then that we're the monkey? How do we take a limiting inventory to know, wait a second, X may not equal Y?
Yeah, well, I mean, it used to be a law, practically a law of nature, that no one could run a 4-minute mile. No human being could ever run a 4-minute mile, right? That used to be a fact. Not even a limiting belief. That was a fact. That was just a fact. Until Jesse Owens, I believe, ran a 4-minute mile. And you have this, so there's only one way to know these things, and that is to test. And just because you test something and it failed, up until whatever it was, 1950 or 55 or whenever it was, nobody had actually tested and actually overcame that belief. So hundreds or thousands of people had probably proven that this is impossible over time. And they'd proven it. They had proven it over and over until someone proved that the opposite was true. And I think the challenge there is that our human tendency is not to test those beliefs that make perfect sense to you. And if something makes perfect sense to you and you think it's impossible, it's very unlikely that you're going to go test that belief. But the fact is that that's the only way you're going to learn something, because if you're only testing the beliefs that you already believe, then you're not going to actually formulate anything really new. So the way to get to someplace really new is to start to test those things that you think are silly and ridiculous, and you think are impossible, because those are the things where you have a chance to truly learn something new.
Mm-hmm. What would be an example of that? I'm thinking, just out of fun, there was a movie I watched a few years ago, Big Hero 6, and this kid wants to get into a robotics school, and he can't figure out how to think out of the box until, I don't remember if he fell or what it was, but he ended up literally sitting on his head. And by sitting on his head, he's looking at the world from a new perspective. Everything became clear to him.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, the thing is that, if I could reduce liminal thinking to a truly all the way down to a formula, then it wouldn't be liminal thinking anymore, because, really liminal thinking is about learning to question and challenge those things that are presented to you as reality. I have interesting conversations with my dad all the time about this. It's like, money. Dad, money is not real. What do you mean money's not real? Of course it's real. Well, it's what's real? What's there? Money is it's a kind of an agreement. It's a shared agreement that we have. But money, just like numbers, they don't exist in any real way. You can't pick up a number, one. You can have one of something, but you can't have a one.
That'll melt your brain a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I have a habit of asking kind of brain melting questions.
So let's go from there, and then I want to get into the second half of the book and some things people can do about this, since they can't pick up the one. But we were talking about it off air, and we're a very apolitical, inclusive of everybody show. So I was actually looking at my numbers yesterday, and I was surprised to see that our number 2 viewership worldwide is in the DC belt. So maybe we have some opportunity for change making here. How do we use liminal thinking to be able to, no matter which side of the coin you're on, chances are you're thinking the other guy or guys are crazy or insane and make absolutely no sense. How do we start to step back to understand that even though it seems crazy to you, there may be a lot more to it?
That's a great question. I think the mistake that we very easily make is we find someone with a opposing point of view or a belief, and we may have a total preponderance of evidence on our side that these facts are the facts, and that the people that we're arguing with are wrong. And so we tell them let's say we are right, okay? Let's say we're right, and just to formulate a little scenario here, a thought experiment. Let's say that you have a person that you're arguing with. You are definitely right, and you are smarter than that other person. And you're right, partly because you're smarter and they're dumber than you. You're right. Okay?
Yeah.
All right. So let's just say you have that situation. Do you think you're going to make any progress with that person telling them that they're dumb and that you're smarter than them? Do you really think that's going to be a productive way to approach that? And if you really did have the information, and if you were truly smarter, who's the person who's most likely in that scenario who should actually step up and listen more? Who is the person who ought to put the olive branch out there, the smarter one or the dumber one? The person who's right or the person who's wrong? Who should the onus be to actually create a platform and an open space for that conversation? I think it should be the smarter one. Ought to be big enough person to be able to say, hey, why don't I listen to you? Why don't I try and understand where you're coming from? Maybe I could understand how you came to this belief, why you hold this belief, what experiences that, let's say I've traveled all around the world, and I'm smarter, and I've got the facts, and this other person has lived their whole life in one little town, going to the same church, hanging out with the same people, and they just don't have the information that I have. What's the best way to build rapport and have a conversation that might actually turn this person around? It's not going to be by telling them they're crazy. It's not going to be by telling them they're stupid. It's not going to be by telling them they're wrong. I mean, it just, when you think about it. Now, I think the question is whether it's an open question often in these conversations. Who is right? Who is the smart one? Now, both people are the smartest one, and both people have all the facts, and both people have greater experience and knowledge. Then you would think they would both have the olive branch. They would both step out and help the other. But the fact is that I think that there is enough for a lot of people. There's enough, perhaps, that maybe there's doubt. Maybe that you're not. There may be doubt that you may not have the facts, or there may be doubt. You think about the things that make you angry when you have an emotional reaction. If you were talking to a person that really was crazy, you wouldn't have that emotional. You wouldn't get angry at them. That's not an emotion that you would have if they were crazy. And if they were stupid, just really stupid, you wouldn't have that reaction that of anger. So what is it? One of the things that I think I'm getting around to the answer to your question, but I think the main answer to the question is ask yourself where that emotion is coming from. Ask yourself, why is this making you angry? If you have someone who doesn't have the appropriate information, they haven't heard the facts, they haven't had the experiences, why does that make you angry? And what are you bringing to the equation? What are you bringing, and how can you empty your cup to try and have a conversation with this person and truly, instead of arguing up here about the facts, try and have a conversation about the experiences and the emotions that led to those beliefs. including your own. And I think you might find that you can have a much more productive conversation when you approach it that way.
I love it. This is actually tying right to yesterday's show, which actually airs Sunday, and yours airs Monday, from a gentleman, Mark Nepo, an amazing human being, and we are talking about how you can certainly argue facts all day long, but you can't argue experiences, and experience just is. From there, let's talk about blind. I appreciate your sharing. I think it's incredibly important for people. Let's talk about blind spots. And how do we figure out what our blind spots are?
Yeah, well, if you could see them, they wouldn't be blind spots, right? So, I mean, that is a challenge. I think, triangulation is a really good way to get around blind spots. And also, one of the best sources of understanding your blind spots is other people. And there's a great exercise called the Johari window, the literally named for two guys named Joe and Harry, who created it. Sounds very mystical until I actually realize where it came from. But it's in the book. It's also widely available. You can look it up on Wikipedia. But it basically has got a whole list of character traits, and you can pick them, or you can write them down. But you can ask people who know you to pick the character traits that describe you, and you'll often find that there are character traits that they pick to describe you that you would never pick for yourself. That's a really interesting way to start discovering blind spots, because the fact that you're blind to certain things does not mean that you have to continue to be blind to them. However, it does require you trusting that another person's perspective might be valid.
I remember when I was in the business world many years ago, and I was working. It was a really fun company to work for in the fashion industry. And I came into this controller's office, or comptroller for the company, and she said, and I'll have to bleep myself here, "Michael, you're an asshole." And I was shocked. Turns out she was right.
But that's a wonderful statement about you, though, that you could hear that and you could triangulate to something that presumably you learned about yourself, right? Or was able to change about yourself or adjust.
I did, and we actually became really great friends, but I had to go and take my ego or the red face down about 1,000 and sit here and go, wait a second. I never would have considered myself one. Why do you feel that way? And that gave me an understanding about how I was portraying myself to the world and how I was viewing situations that I never would have gotten without have gotten such colorful advice.
Yeah. No, I mean, we all have them. And I think one of the first things to do is to recognize that you've got them, blind spots. You have blind spots. If you are at least can admit to yourself that you have them, then you can start being curious about what they might be and start to discover them. You can discover, you think about the blind spot when you're driving, right? You look in the mirror, you've got your rear view mirror and the other rear view mirror. And if you're only looking in the mirrors, you are never going to there might be something in your blind spot that you never see. You have to actually turn around and look to discover that blind spot. And I think it's the same in character traits or other things. The only place you're going to see those blind spots is actually in actually asking people to reflect those things back to you and looking in places that you're not habitually looking. Kind of turn over your shoulder and ask people, what are you seeing that I can't see because of where I'm sitting or the point that I'm occupying?
Very powerful. From there, can you tell us, I'd never heard this word before, I like it, falsifiability.
Yes, the guy's name is Karl Popper. He was a psychologist, he was a philosopher of science was his area. And he was really trying to discover and figure out what separates science from pseudoscience. Pseudoscience being things that maybe have the appearance of science or have the kind of rhetorical weight of science, like maybe religion. at the time that do, but that aren't science. And his example was Freud. He was using Freudian analysis at the time as one of his examples, I believe, in his book. And he said, well, here's the thing. A Freudian can explain if there's a guy on a beach and a kid that's drowning.
Mm-hmm.
A Freudian can explain why the guy rescued the kid. A Freudian can also explain why he didn't rescue the kid. And there will be a perfect explanation in either case. But in neither case can the Freudian predict, is the man going to rescue the kid who's drowning? And so there's this predictive power that science has, that you can have a theory and you can make a prediction based upon it. So the power of something to, and this is the difference, this is this thing that I think is quite fascinating, that there are a lot of theories that have broad explanatory power that can explain everything about the world. I mean, Nazism, if you're within the Nazi party, you can explain everything in the world through that lens, right? Or, just picking an extreme example. But there are lots of theories that have broad explanatory power. However, falsifiability is the idea that says, okay, if I make a prediction and it's false, then I've truly tested that theory. So a theory that is a truly scientific theory has the ability to be falsified because it is making predictions that might possibly not come true. So, if you can make a prediction in a scientific theory, should be something that allows you to make predictions, and it should be something that allows itself to be proven false. If it cannot be proven false, then it's not a scientific theory, according to Popper. That's the way that he drew the line. I find it really useful because most of the time when we test our theories, we're not really giving them a fair test. We're not actually testing our theory in a way that it could fail. We could talk about there being invisible elephants in this room that you can't touch or feel. They're just all around me. There's giant invisible elephants.
I see them everywhere in their invisibleness.
But there's no way that anyone could prove, including me, could prove that's not true. Mm-hmm. So that would make it an unscientific theory. If I were to say, well, these elephants will break the floor tomorrow if they continue to stay here, and they are here, and we could predict, and I could see if the floor crashes in tomorrow or not, then I've made a prediction that is falsifiable.
So it sounds like it's important to check for the falsifiability of things.
Here's a way of thinking about it. If you have a theory that no one could ever prove wrong, then it's not a scientific theory in any way. If you have a belief in something and there's no way that anyone could ever prove to you that it's wrong, then I think it's fair for you to ask yourself if that belief is based in any foundational reality or not. It may be that it's not.
Let's go from there and talking about foundational and talk about what's the importance of putting crackers in one's bed.
That's a story that actually comes from I think it's a field that I think is called cognitive behavioral therapy or something along those lines. It was like I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but that comes from a book. It was there was this kind of really early practice in psychology in the 60s and 70s in the California, where they were the idea is that you by disrupting a thought pattern, you don't have to necessarily have the I'm rambling around this. In psychology, there has long been this idea that if you can go back and examine your past, you can find the causes of your trauma, or you can go back and you could find some problem or thing that once you look at that and peer at that and understand that you will somehow be cured and have this trauma. You confront the demon and they go away. This type of therapy, I think it's called family therapy now that I think about it, or system therapy. That this therapy had the idea that no, you don't have to examine the past. You don't have to actually figure out what caused this problem. What you have to do is try and fix the problem that exists, whatever that might be. And one way to do it is to disrupt that pattern that's reinforcing itself. It's again back to this idea of disrupting routines or creating liminal space. And in this particular story, it was a family that had a very defiant child. He was really pushing back on the authority of his parents, very defiant. And they went to the psychologist, and the psychologist said, "Well, okay, well, what's happening is you're clamping down on him with your authority, which is causing him to be defiant. Perhaps if you find a way to take away the clamp down, top down authority, that you will remove some of his justification for being defiant. Just disrupt the pattern, disrupt the routine, and see what happens." And so what they did was instead of the son came home late, instead of giving him a hard time about it, they would just lock the door, and they'd wait a while, but he'd let him ring the doorbell a few times, and then come down and finally let him in. The crackers in the bed thing was they literally, he didn't make his bed, and so instead of giving him a hard time about it, they just spilled the crackers in the bed, and the kid found crackers in the bed, and it was kind of like, "Oh, yeah, no, I'm sorry, I was cleaning your bed, and I accidentally I was eating crackers while I made your bed, and I'm sorry." And, basically kind of made it uncomfortable for the kid to continue being defiant without giving him any enemy that he could fight.
Yeah.
And so without the enemy, the defiance dissipated, and the kid just started, coming back in line. And I think that's a really interesting. It's like the Spitfire thing. It's the doom loop. You don't realize that if you're in a doom loop, first of all, you want to recognize that you're in a doom loop, and secondly, if you can recognize that you're in a doom loop, you need to recognize that you are part of the doom loop. That you are creating you are somehow a part of that doom loop. You can't be in a doom loop without being a part of it in some way, and contributing to it in some way. So one way, it's like a big dance. The whole world is a bunch of people. We're all dancing with each other in a kind of a sleepwalking way, running through our routines. It only takes one person to step out of the dance to wake everyone up, but everyone else who's touching you up, because suddenly you're not dancing the way that you used to be dancing, and it throws the whole dance off. So if you're in a stuck pattern with anyone, you don't always have to know what the answer is. You can just disrupt it, or just do something random. Throw crackers in the bed. If you can disrupt the routine, what that does is at least it brings everyone's attention back into the moment, and it creates an opportunity for that routine to shift.
A real brief one, and then I'll kind of start to wind things down. But Michelle Isaac, video games and unplugging routers.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. I mean, our son Isaac likes to play video games late at night, and of course, the video games get your adrenaline going, and they get you all pumped up. And so her pattern with him had been, and this was a doom loop that they got in. He'd be playing. It's time to go to bed. She would go up, bang on the door, tell him it's time. Of course, she's interrupting a game, and his adrenaline is high, and that would often result in a fight. And so and I was writing this book at the time, and I said, "Hey, well, what about disrupting the routine? Think about a way just to throw off the dance." And she thought, okay, and she just went and unplugged the router, so turned off the internet basically. And he was used to this. This happens occasionally. Sometimes the router needs to be reset, and of course it was late at night, and she just stood there by the router in the dark. Like he came down to reset the router, and there she was standing there holding the cord. And after probably initial after probably a first reaction, he was like, "Oh, okay," and he went back. And what she did there, we could probably deconstruct and figure out, yeah, okay, well, he had a cooling period between the time the internet went down. He didn't blame her for that because he didn't know she had done it. Now, if she had started to do that all the time, it probably would have just created another routine that would have been equally problematic. But that broke the routine, and it broke the pattern at that moment.
Couple last things, thank you. I'd love to cover before we wrap things up. What's the importance of acting as if it were true?
Well, this is again back to this idea of theories and testing beliefs, testing your own beliefs. Let's say you hear someone spout a belief that they seem very anchored in, very strongly to believe in, and yet you don't think it's true. You think you're right and they're wrong. One way to give that belief a true test is to act as if that belief were true and see what happens. In other words, you don't have to believe a belief to test it. You can act as if it were true and see what happens. And one of the sources of liminal thinking is a philosophy called pragmatism that comes from Henry James and around the turn of the century. And the idea behind pragmatism is that it is not so important whether a theory is true or not. That shouldn't be the ultimate test of the validity of a theory. What we should use the test of validity of a theory is it useful or not? Does it work? Does it get us something that we want? And remember, this is a time when a lot of people were struggling with the onslaught of science and balancing science and morality and religion and these things that have been these institutions that have been around for a very long time. And so when you get to some of the things that are about what is good or spirituality or religion, these things are not necessarily always science in the sense that they're falsifiable. To look at beliefs and say, okay, if you have a belief, if someone has a belief that seems strange to you, ask yourself, what would you need to believe for that to be true? What would it feel like for you to believe that? What would need to be in your world? What would your world need to have for you to believe that that is true? I think there's a lot of these very small kind of almost mental tricks that we can use to ask ourselves these questions that will start to say, okay, let's take myself out of the position that I hold inside my skull, try and take myself out and put myself over here, in between, out there. That's the nature. That's what those questions are aiming at, trying to get at.
I like it. On that, the last one I have before, just a couple quick wrap-up questions is, and this kind of leads in this direction, the importance of taking a risk.
Yeah, I mean, this is just an observation. What keeps most people from achieving their dreams is fear. I mean, I think fear stops a lot of great things from happening. Fear stops a lot of great opportunities from being realized. A lot of the limiting beliefs that are of the limiting kind are anchored in fear. And I think that one thing I tell myself all the time, and I tell other people whenever I have a chance, is if you're in doubt, if you have a big decision to make in your life, and you're in doubt about what's the right path to go towards the fear. Because the very fact that you're struggling means that you are struggling between a safe thing and an unsafe thing. Well, if the safe thing were the right answer, then you would know.
Good point.
The fact that you don't know means that the unsafe thing is probably the right answer. So whenever you have this big decision and you have this doubt about, oh, do I hold on to what I have that's great, or do I step out into this unknown space? If you have the doubt, then the fear is the way you ought to go. Go towards the fear whenever you're in doubt.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Couple quick wrap-up questions. First off, I guess it's actually 3. What personally brings you the greatest happiness, or what I call the woohoo factor?
For me, it's bringing new things into the world, whether it's a book or a drawing. It's the act of creation. Truly, there's nothing that beats it for me.
Awesome. From there, on the creation note, where can people go to find out more and to find your beautiful books?
I made a whole website just for liminal thinking, liminalthinking.com. It's got videos, it's got articles, it's got some stuff from the book, and you can order the book directly from there.
My name is Dave Gray, and I'm going to show you an exercise today called Squiggle Birds. You might be asking yourself, what's a squiggle bird? Well, I'm going to tell you right now. Basically, Squiggle Birds is an exercise that you can use if you want to get a group of people comfortable drawing. Let's say you're talking to business people or people who don't see themselves as artists. Maybe you're a therapist. You want to get people to start drawing their problems. You're a consultant. You want to get them to start drawing their ideas for innovation or for some other purpose. And you just want to get them comfortable with the idea, get them over the hump so they can start putting pen to paper and start drawing things. Squiggle Birds is a great exercise for that. I learned this from my friend Chris Glenn, who is a fine teacher who teaches fine things, illustrator and artist, extraordinary person, and a great teacher. And I'm going to share this with you now. So here's what you do. You just get people to start making random squiggles on a sheet of paper like this. Just random squiggles. Any type of thing that they might want to make. I want to make a few of these here. And so now we've got some just totally random squiggles on a page. And then what you do is you want to show them, give them a couple of thoughts, like for example, and say, okay, now what we can do is we can add a beak, a little triangle, and an eye, and a couple of little bird feet, and maybe a tail, triangle. And suddenly you have a bird. And any of these shapes, you do the same thing. Here's one that's sort of already got a beak, a couple of feet, and a tail. Suddenly we have a bird. What about this guy? We could, and you can do so many things. You can put the beak anywhere. Maybe this guy is trying to get a worm. And we can draw a little worm there. And a tail. Surprising how well this works, isn't it? You know, you've got basically, and the reason it works, and the point of the exercise is to say to people that the mind is an incredibly flexible instrument, that no matter what you do, you know, that, our minds can process information, and we can we're a pattern finding machine. The brain just naturally finds patterns. We can't help but see things and assign meaning to them. So, the mind, the point of this is that your drawing doesn't actually have to be that good or even that thoughtful, or you don't even have to have figured out, how to draw things, because especially if you're drawing simply to communicate ideas and not to, make some great artistic statement. The reason for this is that the mind fills it in. Now, you can also, another thing I also tell people is if there's any doubt, you want to make something into something, here, like this guy. Sorry, I'm getting distracted because it's so fun. This is another thing about this exercise. This is really, really fun to do. So the point being that you don't have to worry too much about your drawing. The mind will fill it in. I'm going to finish these birds as I'm talking because it is really fun. It's a fun exercise. And I also tell people that, if there's any doubt and you're drawing something and you don't feel like it's really clear, just label it. Visual thinking does not mean that we can't use words or arrows or other diagrams or other things. All these things are, anytime you're doing visual thinking, I was kind of curious how these things are going to turn into birds. You're sort of like what we're talking about is a sort of a kind of discovery here as well. That's pretty fascinating. So remember, the mind will fill it in. Don't worry too much. Start putting pen to paper. And you can use, my name is Dave Gray. You can find me on Twitter at Dave Gray. Again, I got this exercise from my friend Chris Glenn, which I'll share in the comments. And try this out. It's a great way to get people drawing and thinking visually. Take care. Talk to you next time.
Fantastic. If you didn't catch that, if you're driving down the road, just go on over to inspirenationshow.com and we'll get you over to Dave as well. Any last words of wisdom you want to share with us today, Dave?
I'm just really grateful that you had me. It was a pleasure to talk to you, and I'm really glad to be a part of the journey that you're on. So thanks for having me.
And thank you so much for the journey as well. And I really think this is going to do a lot of good for people because I think everybody says Well, when you say it's at no point, people at another time period would say at no point and at no point at no point. But at no point in our history that I can recall, would it be more helpful to step outside of our own boxes and to be able to try to understand what's going on in other people's?
I agree.
Woohoo! So thank you so much for being on the show, Dave. This has been true honor and a pleasure and a treat for everyone out there. This is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get liminal thinking, and change your world by changing the way you think, and shine bright. Woohoo! Thank you so much, Dave.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!